Stop! He's not dying from what you think. The words cracked through the pediatric intensive care unit like lightning splitting open a storm, and for one impossible second, every sound inside St. Gabriel Medical Center seemed to freeze. The monitors still beeped. The oxygen machine still hissed. The overhead lights still burned white against polished floors. But every eye turned toward the small voice near the doorway. In the center of the room, 11-month-old Noah Whitmore lay motionless in a hospital bed no bigger than a crib, his tiny chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths as 18 of the most respected pediatric specialists in the country stood around him with exhausted faces and empty answers. Dr. Harrison Blake, Chief of Pediatric Critical Care, pulled off his gloves and stepped back, his jaw tight with defeat. "We've tried everything," he said, his voice low. "There's nothing else we can do." Jonathan Whitmore stared at him like he hadn't heard the words right. At 42, Jonathan was the kind of billionaire whose name lit up stock markets and headlines, a man who built skyscrapers, funded elections, and made billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. But none of that mattered now. Not with his son lying pale beneath hospital lights. Not with the rhythm of Noah's heartbeat slowing on the screen. Jonathan stepped closer to the bed, his expensive shoes silent against the tile, his hands trembling as he touched Noah's tiny fingers. They felt cold. Too cold. "Do something," Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking. "Please!" But the doctors avoided his eyes. Around the room, machines hummed like distant thunder, and the silence from the specialists felt louder than any alarm. Then the voice came again. "You're treating the wrong thing." Security turned first. At the doorway stood a boy, no older than 8, small and still, wearing faded sneakers with loose laces and a dark blue hoodie 2 sizes too big. A worn backpack hung from one shoulder. His name was Malik Carter. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had only come upstairs to bring dinner to his mother, who worked the late shift cleaning hospital rooms. But when he heard the panic and saw the crowd outside Noah's room, something made him stop. Something in the sound of the baby's breathing. Dr. Blake frowned. "Who let him in here?" A security guard stepped forward. "Kid, you need to leave." But Malik didn't move. His brown eyes stayed locked on Noah, focused, sharp, unshaken. Jonathan turned toward him, his face tight with grief and confusion. "What did you say?" Malik swallowed hard, gripping the strap of his backpack. "His fingers," Malik said softly. "Look at his nails. They're turning purple. That's not his heart." The room shifted. Dr. Blake scoffed. "Son, this is a restricted floor. You don't understand what you're talking about." But Malik's eyes never left the baby. "I do," he whispered. "Because my sister looked exactly like that before she died." And suddenly, in a room full of world-famous doctors, the smallest person there became the only one who sounded certain. The room went still after Malik spoke, the kind of silence that felt heavy enough to bend the air. Dr. Harrison Blake stared at the boy as if he had wandered into the wrong world by mistake. Around him, 17 other specialists exchanged uneasy glances, their white coats stiff under the cold hospital lights. Jonathan Whitmore looked from the doctors to Malik, his breathing uneven, his mind caught between panic and disbelief. Noah's heart monitor gave another sharp beep, slower now, weaker. The green line on the screen dipped, and climbed like it was fighting to stay alive. "Get him out of here," Dr. Blake said firmly, motioning toward security. "This is a medical emergency, not a guessing game." The guard stepped closer, reaching for Malik's shoulder, but the boy took one step back, keeping his eyes fixed on Noah. "I am not guessing," Malik said, his voice trembling but steady. "His lips are pale, but his fingers are purple. That means something is blocking oxygen before it reaches his blood." One of the younger doctors laughed nervously. "And where exactly did you learn that? Elementary school science?" Malik tightened his grip on his backpack strap. "From watching my little sister die because nobody listened." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Jonathan froze. There was no anger in the boy's voice, only memory. Real memory. pain that sounded too old for someone so young. Dr. Blake folded his arms. Listen, son. We have run every test possible. Heart scans, brain scans, blood panels. 18 experts have looked at this child. Malik nodded once. That is the problem. Blake frowned. Excuse me? Malik swallowed. Too many people looking at the big things. Nobody looked at the small thing. Jonathan turned sharply. What small thing? Malik pointed toward Noah's tiny hands resting on the blanket. His nails. The color under them. My sister had that. Dr. Blake shook his head impatiently. Enough. But Jonathan stepped closer to the bed and looked. For the first time, he saw it. A faint blue-purple tint under Noah's fingernails. Tiny. Easy to miss. But there. Jonathan looked back at the doctors. Was that checked? The room hesitated. A female specialist flipped through digital charts on her tablet. Oxygen saturation dropped, but we assumed it was secondary. Malik's eyes sharpened. It is not secondary. Jonathan stared at him. How do you know? Malik's face tightened, and for a second, the polished hospital wall seemed to fade behind his memory. He saw his little sister Ava lying in a narrow hospital bed 3 years ago, breathing harder every minute while doctors searched for answers that never came. He remembered his grandmother whispering through tears, telling them to check for toxin exposure, but nobody listened because she was just an old woman from the south side. Ava died before sunrise. Malik blinked back into the room. Because Ava died waiting for doctors to stop looking at machines and start looking at her. Jonathan felt something twist inside his chest. Not because of what Malik said, but because of how he said it. Like truth did not need permission. Noah's breathing hitched. The monitor stuttered. Dr. Blake stepped toward the bed again, urgency returning. Mr. Whitmore, we need to prepare for final stabilization. But Jonathan did not move. His eyes stayed on Malik. For the first time that night, he was no longer looking at a poor boy in an oversized hoodie. He was looking at the only person in the room who sounded like he had seen this before. And for the first time that night, Jonathan Whitmore began to wonder if the experts had missed something only a child could see. Jonathan Whitmore stepped closer to Malik, the polished leather of his shoes barely making a sound against the hospital floor. But his breathing was loud now, sharp and uneven, like every second was cutting through him. Noah's monitor flickered again, the green lines stumbling in jagged rhythms that made the entire room feel smaller. Dr. Harrison Blake turned back to the bed, adjusting the oxygen line with practiced hands, but Jonathan's voice stopped him. Wait! The single word landed hard. Every doctor paused. Blake turned slowly. Mr. Whitmore, your son is crashing. We cannot stop now. Jonathan looked at Malik. The boy stood still at the doorway, small beneath the bright fluorescent lights, his oversized hoodie hanging loose, his sneakers damp from the rain outside. He looked out of place in a room full of million-dollar equipment, but somehow more grounded than anyone else there. Tell me what you saw, Jonathan said. Malik hesitated, his fingers tightening around his backpack strap. When Noah breathed, his chest moved too fast, but not deep enough, Malik said. And his fingers changed color first. Dr. Blake sighed. That happens when the heart is failing. Malik shook his head. No. My sister's doctor said the same thing. But it was not her heart. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. What was it? Malik swallowed. The memory hit him like cold rain. 3 years ago. Ava Carter, 6 years old, sitting on the edge of their tiny apartment couch, coughing, weak, barely able to hold her juice box. Malik remembered her hands. Tiny fingers turning purple while adults argued about asthma, allergies, infection. Nobody understood. Nobody looked close enough. Until Grandma Evelyn had remembered something. A cheap plastic toy from a discount store, covered in chemicals that had triggered a rare toxic reaction in Ava's bloodstream. By the time they figured it out, it was too late. Malik blinked back to the hospital room. Toxic hypoxia, he whispered. One of the younger doctors looked up sharply. That is impossible. Malik shook his head. It is not. Dr. Blake crossed his arms. That condition is extremely rare. Malik nodded. Rare does not mean impossible. Jonathan looked between them. Did anyone test for toxins? Silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. A female specialist checked Noah's digital chart, scrolling quickly. Her face changed. Standard panels came back negative. Malik stepped forward. Standard panels do not test for everything. Blake's jaw tightened. Enough. This child needs expert care, not theories from an 8-year-old. But Jonathan was not looking at Blake anymore. He was looking at Noah's blanket. A stuffed elephant rested beside the baby's hand, half tucked beneath his arm. Jonathan frowned. That toy. The nanny had bought it yesterday from a boutique downtown. Noah had not let go of it all day. Malik noticed it too. His eyes widened. Did he sleep with that? Jonathan nodded. Malik's heartbeat jumped. Ava had one too. Different animal. Same store. The room changed again. Dr. Blake stepped closer to the toy, suddenly less certain. Jonathan's voice dropped low. Test it. Blake hesitated. Mr. Whitmore, we do not have time for test it. Jonathan said again, firmer now. For the first time that night, authority shifted. Not from doctor to billionaire, but from certainty to doubt. Malik stared at the stuffed elephant, his stomach twisting with the truth he prayed was wrong. Because if he was right, then Noah was not dying from illness. He was being poisoned by the one thing meant to comfort him. Dr. Harrison Blake stared at the stuffed elephant in his gloved hand as if it had suddenly become dangerous, the soft gray fabric now carrying a weight no one in the room had noticed before. The hospital lights reflected against the plastic eyes of the toy, making them look strangely lifeless. For a moment, no one moved. The machines kept humming. Noah's monitor kept pulsing weaker. The oxygen line hissed softly beside his tiny bed. Jonathan Whitmore stepped closer, his eyes locked on the toy. How long will it take? He asked. Blake looked toward the lab technician standing near the door. A rapid toxin scan could take 10 minutes. Jonathan's face tightened. Do it. The technician rushed out, carrying the elephant in a sealed bag. But Dr. Blake turned back, frustration creeping into his voice. Even if the toy is contaminated, we do not know if it caused this reaction. Malik stepped forward again, his small sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished tile. Check his throat. Blake frowned. What? Malik swallowed. Ava had swelling inside. Not outside. It blocked the oxygen before it got to her blood. One of the specialists shook his head. That would have shown on the scans. Malik's eyes lifted to him. Not if it started fast. Jonathan turned sharply. Did you check for internal airway swelling? The younger female doctor hesitated. There was minor irritation, but it did not match the cardiac symptoms. Malik looked at Noah's tiny face, pale beneath the hospital light, his breath short and strained. The sound pulled Malik backward into memory again. Ava gasping on the couch. Grandma Evelyn kneeling beside her, crying and praying, begging the doctors to listen. The smell of rubbing alcohol. The cold ambulance lights outside the apartment window. Malik clenched his fists. He could not watch it happen again. Please, Malik said, his voice cracking now. Please look. Jonathan heard it. Not confidence this time. Fear. Real fear. The kind only someone who had lost before could carry. Blake rubbed his forehead, exhausted and irritated. Mr. Whitmore, we are talking about trusting the instincts of an 8-year-old over 18 specialists. Jonathan's eyes hardened. No. We are talking about checking one thing you may have missed. Blake looked around the room. Every doctor felt it now. The shift. The room no longer belonged to medical authority alone. It belonged to possibility. Dr. Emily Ross, the youngest pulmonologist on the team, stepped forward. I can run a bronchoscope. 5 minutes. Blake looked at her. Emily, this is not standard protocol. Emily's voice stayed calm. Mather is losing him. The words hung in the air. Jonathan nodded. Do it. Blake hesitated, then stepped aside. Emily moved quickly, preparing the equipment, while nurses adjusted Noah's oxygen levels. Jonathan stood at Noah's bedside, one hand resting near his son's tiny foot beneath the blanket, as if touch alone could keep him here. Malik stayed near the doorway, silent now, watching every movement. The bronchoscope's screen flickered to life. Emily guided the tiny camera carefully. The room crowded around the monitor. Then her face changed. Oh my God! Blake stepped forward. What is it? Emily pointed at the screen. Deep inside Noah's airway, the tissue was swollen nearly shut. Not from disease. Not from the heart. From exposure. Malik's breathing stopped for a second. It was exactly like Ava. Jonathan looked at Blake, his face pale with disbelief. 18 doctors. And the answer had been hiding in the smallest place of all. The image on the bronchoscope screen held the room captive, a narrow passage of swollen tissue glowing under the cold blue light of the monitor. Dr. Emily Ross pulled the scope back slowly, her hands steady but her face pale. No one spoke for a moment. The truth was there now, undeniable. Noah was not suffering from heart failure. His airway was closing from a severe toxic reaction, the kind that could suffocate from the inside before any machine could explain it. Dr. Harrison Blake stepped closer to the screen, his confidence cracking for the first time that night. How did we miss this? He murmured, almost to himself. Malik stood frozen near the doorway, staring at the monitor like it was a ghost from his past. It was the same image he remembered from Ava. The same swelling. The same hidden danger. Jonathan Whitmore looked at Blake, his voice low and sharp. Fix it. Blake straightened. We can reduce the swelling, but we need immediate anti-inflammatory treatment and toxin neutralization. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Then do it. But Blake hesitated. There is a risk. Jonathan stepped forward. There has been risk for the last hour while you were treating the wrong thing. Blake's face hardened. The medication is aggressive. If the toxin has spread, it could overwhelm his system. Jonathan looked at Noah, his tiny body still and fragile beneath the white blanket. Every breath sounded thinner now, shorter, like time itself was shrinking. Jonathan turned back. What are his chances if you do nothing? Emily answered quietly. Very low. The room fell silent again. Jonathan closed his eyes for half a second, the weight of fatherhood crushing through every layer of power and money he had built around himself. Boardrooms never scared him. Competitors never broke him. But standing beside his son, unable to protect him, made him feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Then he opened his eyes. Do it. Blake hesitated one last time. I need your signature for emergency authorization. A clipboard was handed over. Jonathan signed without reading. His hand shook so badly the ink dragged across the paper. Across the room, Malik shifted his weight, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had seen this moment before too. Adults choosing. Deciding. Racing against something invisible. But this time felt different. This time someone had listened. A nurse rushed in, carrying emergency medication prepared in clear syringes. Emily moved to Noah's bedside, checking his oxygen. We have minutes, she said. Blake nodded. Administer the corticosteroids. Prepare toxin reversal protocol. The room exploded into motion. Nurses moved quickly, monitors adjusted, medicine pushed into lines, machines recalibrated. The air changed. Faster. Sharper. Like hope had returned but was running out of breath. Jonathan stepped back, his eyes never leaving Noah. Then he turned toward Malik. For the first time, really seeing him. Why did you stay? Jonathan asked, his voice rough. Malik looked down at his worn sneakers. Because somebody should have stayed for my sister. Jonathan swallowed hard. The words struck deeper than any diagnosis. Across the hall, the lab doors opened and the technician ran in, breathless, holding the report. Dr. Blake snatched it and scanned the page. His face drained. The toy tested positive. Jonathan's heart dropped. For what? Blake looked up slowly. Industrial cleaning solvent residue. High concentration. Malik froze. His mother cleaned these floors every night. And suddenly one terrifying thought hit him harder than anything else. If that toxin came from inside the hospital, then Noah's sickness had not started at home. It had started here. The lab report trembled slightly in Dr. Harrison Blake's hand as the words settled over the room like ice. Industrial cleaning solvent. High concentration. Jonathan Whitmore stared at the page, his mind struggling to catch up with the meaning. Noah's tiny stuffed elephant had carried enough toxic residue to trigger the reaction. The same toy his son had slept with. The same toy he had held against his face all day. Jonathan looked at the hospital staff, his eyes narrowing. How does a baby's toy get covered in cleaning solvent inside one of the best hospitals in America? No one answered. The machines continued their sharp rhythm around Noah's bed, but now every sound felt accusatory. Dr. Emily Ross adjusted Noah's oxygen mask, watching the monitor closely. The medication is in, she said. Now we wait. Wait. Jonathan hated that word. It felt weak. Helpless. He looked down at Noah, his son's tiny fingers still curled against the blanket, the faint purple beneath the nails now more obvious than ever. He should have seen it sooner. He should have noticed something was wrong before it got this far. Across the room, Malik stood completely still, but his mind was racing. Cleaning solvent. Hospital grade. Strong enough to trigger respiratory swelling. His stomach tightened. He knew those chemicals. His mother used them every night on the children's floor. Not on toys. Never on toys. Unless someone made a mistake. Or worse, ignored the rules. Dr. Blake lowered the report and looked at a nurse. Trace the cleaning logs from the last 24 hours. Every room. Every staff member. The nurse nodded and rushed out. Jonathan turned toward Malik. How did you know it was not his heart? Malik looked at Noah, then at the floor. Because Ava got sleepy first, he said quietly. Then her breathing got smaller. Everybody thought she was tired. But it was her airway closing. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. He had spent millions on specialists tonight. Yet the answer came from a boy carrying grief instead of degrees. Suddenly Noah's monitor changed. The heart rate jumped. Faster. Then steadier. Emily looked at the screen. Wait. Everyone froze. Noah's oxygen numbers began climbing. 82. 86. 90. The room seemed to hold its breath with him. Blake stepped closer, watching carefully. The swelling is responding. Jonathan's knees nearly gave out. He grabbed the side rail of the bed just to stay standing. Noah's breathing deepened. Small. Weak. But stronger than before. Jonathan exhaled a breath he felt like he had been holding for hours. Malik stared at the monitor, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar. Relief. The kind he never got with Ava. The kind that felt almost unfair. But before anyone could settle into hope, the ICU doors burst open and a middle-aged woman in hospital scrubs rushed in, breathless, eyes wide with fear. Malik's eyes widened. Mom? Tanya Carter stood frozen when she saw him. In one hand she held her cleaning gloves. In the other, a crumpled paper log. Her face looked pale under the bright lights. Malik, she whispered. What are you doing here? But her eyes dropped to the lab report in Blake's hand, and the color drained from her face completely. Jonathan saw it immediately. The fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Tanya's lips trembled. That toy, she said softly. I saw someone wipe it down tonight. The room went silent again. Jonathan stepped forward slowly. Who? Tanya looked at Noah, then at Malik, and for the first time that night, the truth felt even bigger than the poison itself. Tanya Carter stood at the doorway, her chest rising fast, her cleaning gloves still clutched in her hand like proof she had not meant to walk into this storm. The fluorescent lights made her look smaller than Malik remembered, tired from another 12-hour shift, her shoulders carrying the weight of bills, grief, and survival. Jonathan Whitmore turned toward her, his eyes sharp, searching her face for answers. Noah's monitor continued its steadier rhythm now, each beep stronger than before, but the room was far from calm. Dr. Harrison Blake stepped forward, holding the lab report. "You said you saw someone wipe the toy down?" Tanya nodded, swallowing hard. "About 2 hours ago. I was cleaning room 12 when I passed the nursery lounge." Her voice shook. One of the staff had the elephant on the counter. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Tanya looked at the floor for a second, then back up. "Nurse Valerie." Dr. Emily Ross frowned. Valerie was assigned to pediatric rotation tonight. Blake's face tightened. Why would she clean a toy with industrial solvent? Tanya shook her head. "I do not know. But I remember because I told her that was the wrong bottle." Jonathan stepped closer. "And?" Tanya hesitated. "She said it was fine. Said it would dry." Malik's stomach twisted. He knew that phrase. Fine. It would dry. The same thing the discount store manager had said about Ava's toy when Grandma Evelyn called to complain. Jonathan ran a hand over his face, anger building beneath his skin. Find her. Blake turned to security immediately. Now. The guard rushed out. But before anyone could move again, Noah's monitor changed. A stronger pulse. 98. Then 104. Emily stepped closer, checking his airway. Her face softened. The swelling is going down. Jonathan looked at Noah. His son's tiny fingers moved. Just a twitch. Barely there. But real. Jonathan froze. Noah? The room held still. Then Noah let out a small breath, deeper than before, and his eyelids fluttered. Jonathan's knees buckled, and he dropped beside the bed, gripping the rails so tightly his knuckles turned white. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. The sound in his throat was not a cry, not a word, just relief breaking open after hours of fear. Malik stood frozen at the doorway, staring at the tiny movement. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times with Ava. Her waking up. Her opening her eyes. But it had never happened. Now it was happening for someone else. And somehow that hurt and healed at the same time. Jonathan looked up at Malik, tears shining under the hospital lights. You saved him. Malik shook his head softly. I just remembered. Jonathan stood and crossed the room. For a second, the billionaire and the boy stood face to face, 2 worlds apart, connected by one small life still breathing. Jonathan lowered himself to one knee in front of Malik, his voice rough. No. You stayed. You spoke. You made them look. Malik looked down, unsure what to do with gratitude that big. Then the ICU doors opened again. Security returned, but Nurse Valerie was not with them. Instead, the guard looked pale. She is gone. Blake frowned. Gone? The guard nodded. Locker emptied. Badge left behind. Jonathan's face hardened. This was no accident anymore. And standing there in the cold hospital light, with Noah breathing again and the truth slipping through someone's fingers, Jonathan Whitmore realized this night was no longer just about saving his son. It was about uncovering why someone wanted him sick in the first place. The intensive care unit felt different now. Not safe, not calm, but changed. Noah Whitmore's breathing had steadied, each rise of his tiny chest stronger than the last, the oxygen monitor glowing with numbers that no longer looked like a countdown. But relief had been replaced by something colder. Questions. Jonathan Whitmore stood beside his son's bed, one hand resting gently against the blanket, his mind racing faster than the machines around him. Nurse Valerie had vanished. Her badge abandoned. Her locker empty. That was not panic. That was escape. Dr. Harrison Blake stood near the nurse's station, speaking sharply into his phone, ordering security footage, access logs, everything from the pediatric floor. Dr. Emily Ross adjusted Noah's medication line, checking his airway again. "He is stabilizing," she said quietly. "If the swelling keeps dropping, he should be breathing on his own by morning." Jonathan nodded, but his eyes were distant. Morning felt 1,000 miles away. Across the room, Malik sat beside his mother for the first time that night, his small legs dangling from a plastic chair, his backpack resting at his feet. Tanya held his hand tightly, still shaken by everything she had seen. She looked at him like she was trying to understand how her little boy had stepped into a room full of experts and changed everything. "You should not have been up here," she whispered. Malik looked down. "I heard people crying." Tanya swallowed. That answer hurt her more than if he had broken every rule in the building. Because it sounded like Malik. Always listening. Always carrying other people's pain. Jonathan walked over to them slowly. The billionaire looked different now. Less polished. Less untouchable. His tie hung loose. His shirt's sleeves were rolled up. His eyes were red from fear and exhaustion. He stopped in front of Tanya. "Your son saved my child." Tanya shook her head quickly. "He just noticed something." Jonathan looked at Malik. "That is more than 18 doctors did." Before anyone could answer, Dr. Blake returned, his face grim. "We found the footage." Jonathan turned sharply. "And?" Blake hesitated. "Valerie was not alone." The room froze. Blake held up his tablet. Security footage from the nursery lounge played silently. Valerie stood at the counter with Noah's stuffed elephant. But beside her stood another figure. A man in a tailored suit, face partially hidden beneath a baseball cap. Jonathan stepped closer, his heartbeat slowing into something dangerous. He recognized the posture immediately. The expensive watch. The silver ring. "Zoom in," Jonathan said. Blake enlarged the image. Jonathan's stomach dropped. It was Daniel Whitmore. His younger brother. Jonathan stared at the screen, unable to breathe for a second. Daniel had been at the hospital earlier that afternoon. He brought flowers. Held Noah for 10 minutes. Smiled for pictures. Jonathan stepped back like the floor had shifted beneath him. "No," he whispered. Blake looked confused. "You know him?" Jonathan's voice turned hollow. "That is my brother." Tanya covered her mouth. Malik stared at the screen, confused but sensing the room fracture in ways deeper than medicine. Jonathan's mind raced through everything. Daniel had been pushing hard for control of the family company for months. Board pressure. Investor tension. Inheritance clauses. If Jonathan lost focus, if Noah. Jonathan could not finish the thought. Dr. Blake looked at him carefully. "Do you think this was intentional?" Jonathan's face hardened, grief turning into clarity. "I think my son was not the target." The room went silent. Malik frowned. "What do you mean?" Jonathan looked at Noah sleeping peacefully now, then at the poisoned toy. "That toy was handed to me first." And suddenly everyone understood. The poison was never meant for the baby. It was meant for Jonathan. The truth settled over the intensive care unit like winter frost, sharp and impossible to ignore. Jonathan Whitmore stood frozen, staring at the paused security footage on Dr. Harrison Blake's tablet, his younger brother's face glowing beneath the pale hospital light. Daniel Whitmore. Family. Blood. The one person Jonathan had trusted to help carry the weight of their empire when their father died. And now that trust felt cracked beyond repair. Jonathan's breathing slowed, but not from calm. From focus. The kind of focus that built billion-dollar companies and survived ruthless boardrooms. But this was different. This was personal. Noah stirred softly in the hospital bed behind him, his breathing stronger now, his tiny hand moving against the blanket as if reaching for something in sleep. Jonathan turned back to his son, and for the first time in hours, he allowed himself to believe Noah would live. The machines no longer sounded like warnings. They sounded like proof. Proof that Malik had been right. Proof that one boy's courage had undone a room full of failure. Jonathan looked toward Malik, who sat quietly beside his mother, still trying to understand how a toy, a nurse, and a rich man's brother could all fit into one terrible night. Tanya Carter wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders, holding him close like she finally understood how close he had come to carrying another loss. Dr. Blake cleared his throat. "Security is contacting the police." Jonathan shook his head. "No." Blake frowned. "What?" Jonathan's eyes stayed on the screen. "Not yet." Blake looked confused. "If your brother is involved..." Jonathan cut him off. "If Daniel planned this, he will have a reason. And desperate people make mistakes when they think they have one." His voice was steady now, cold and sharp. He looked at Blake. "Lock down the hospital. Quietly. No alerts. No press. No police until I say so." Blake hesitated, then nodded. Jonathan turned and walked toward Malik. The room watched in silence as one of the most powerful men in America stopped in front of an 8-year-old boy and lowered himself to eye level again. Jonathan's voice softened. "What made you speak tonight?" Malik looked down at his hands. Small hands? Steady hands? "Because when Ava needed help, everybody waited for someone smarter." He looked up. "And she ran out of time." Jonathan felt the words hit deeper than any business betrayal ever could. He glanced back at Noah. Breathing. Alive. Because this boy refused to wait. Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a silver card. Not a business card. A private family access card. He placed it in Malik's hand. "This opens every door in my foundation building downtown," Jonathan said. Malik blinked. "Why?" Jonathan's eyes softened. "Because kids like you should be inside rooms where people listen." Tanya's eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Then the ICU doors opened once more. A hospital security officer stepped in, breathless, holding a small evidence bag. Inside was a handwritten note found in Nurse Valerie's locker. Jonathan took it and unfolded it carefully. 3 words stared back at him in black ink. "Asked your father?" Jonathan's face changed. Daniel was involved. But maybe not alone. Maybe this was older. Bigger. Deeper than greed. Jonathan folded the note slowly and looked at Noah, then at Malik. One child had saved his son tonight. But the truth still waiting beyond these walls might destroy everything Jonathan thought he knew about his family. And for the first time in his life, the richest man in the room understood that survival was only the beginning.